Hello guys, in this video we are going to learn about competence, one of the basic intrinsic human needs according to self-determination theory, and specifically how it applies to video games. Humans have an innate desire to grow their abilities, to be competent at things they do. We can see this with children. They love mastering the movements of their body, mastering language, and all those skills that are fundamental to function in the world. This basic need for competence doesn't disappear when we grow older, it stays throughout our lives. We feel exhilaration when we start to master a second language, or when we perfect that kitchen recipe of a dessert we love. Deci and Ryan define it as the individual's inherent desire to feel effective in interacting with the environment. However, to feel satisfaction, there needs to be a real challenge. Think about the first time you played tic-tac-toe as a kid, and you found enjoyment at playing it. But later, when you understood the simple strategies associated with it, you started to lose interest. It was enjoyable while it presented a challenge, but shortly after you fully mastered the game, that enjoyment quickly began to fade away until you stopped playing and moved on to something else. Video games are amazing at tapping at our intrinsic need for competence. Let's look how an early game fills this basic need. This is Donkey Kong Arcade. Each level presents the player with the challenge of reaching the top of the building in order to save Pauline from Donkey Kong. The player must jump through obstacles, climb ladders, and have great timing. With each attempt, the player gains mastery, and as he gains mastery, he feels effective. This is the basic way video games fill the human need for competence. The game presents a challenge, and the player gets feelings of competence as he overcomes said challenge. It's about extending the player's ability in a meaningful way during gameplay. Now, there are some conditions or ingredients for this satisfying feeling to arise within the player. Number 1, the goal must be clear. If there is no goal or it is not clear enough, it is harder for the player to measure their competence at the task, and thus there may be no sense of mastery. It is the goal or the goals that give meaning to the player's performance. Our second ingredient is that the player feels the challenge is not overwhelming. The player must feel that he can and eventually will succeed at the task. In Donkey Kong, the player keeps attempting to reach the top of the building because he feels that he can achieve it. The third ingredient is clear and meaningful feedback based on player actions. This feedback can take many forms. For example, in Donkey Kong, when the player successfully jumps over a barrel, a sound plays that lets him know that he has overcome the obstacle. If he fails, he also gets an auditory and visual feedback. The score is also another form of feedback. It conveys meaningful information based on the player's performance. Advancing a level is another form of feedback. It's basically any kind of information that lets the player know how well he is doing and how he can improve. So, to recap, there are 3 ingredients for a situation to potentially fill the need for competence. Number 1, clarity about the goal. Number 2, challenge must not be overwhelming. And 3, clear feedback that lets the player learn useful information each time he engages in the challenge. Let's look at a more recent game and how competence needs play a role in it. Most people know Candy Crush Saga. It's a tile matching game. Each level presents the player with a challenge, like eliminating a certain type of candy or getting a fixed number of points. Candy Crush has the essential ingredients to make the player feel competent. It presents clear goals. Challenges are not overwhelming, and it provides constant feedback. What is most important to remember about the human need for competence is that it's about a feeling of effectiveness. People want to feel they are capable and effective at what they do. Candy Crush is especially good at this task. It's usually easy to find a match at any given moment, and each successful match works as proof of the player's effectiveness. Also, as an extra to highlight player capability, almost all levels hold the potential for a big explosion of candies via different power-ups.
Divine. Tasty.
What would a Candy Crush Saga version that doesn't worry about a player's feelings of competence be like? Imagine if the first level looked like this. And let's imagine that instead of having a minimum of 3 candies to match it, would be a 6 or 7. Suddenly the player won't feel very effective, as he struggles to find even one match. His needs for competence won't be easily satisfied. One thing to remember is that the game must always strive to keep the player optimally challenged. To accomplish this, the challenges must keep scaling as the player improves his skills. If the challenges were to grow too slowly in terms of difficulty, the player might get bored and lose interest as he gets better at the current level of mastery. On the other end of the spectrum, if the challenges grow too hard too fast, the player will feel overwhelmed. In either case, the player won't have a chance to experience feelings of satisfaction, since his need for competence is not being met. Keeping the player on the sweet spot where he feels challenged but not overwhelmed is all about giving him opportunities to feel capable and effective. Good games keep the player optimally challenged in more than one way. For example, in Mike Tyson's Punch-Out!, opponents scale simultaneously in punch speed, in stamina, and in the complexity of their moves. To advance, the player must gain mastery at dodging, at hitting, and at solving puzzles. The main advantage of having multiple skill dimension scaling at the same time is that the player gets plenty of opportunities to get competent. It also adds layers of depth to the gameplay, which keeps him further engaged. Those feelings of effectiveness of course aren't confined to video games. Sports and other kinds of games like board games are fundamentally designed to create challenges that satisfy the same need for competence. In reality, any activity can be included. Take for example, people whose daily jobs consist of driving. They might find joy in finding a faster route for a destination, or maybe they find joy in finding ways to spend less gas on the car. The need for competence manifests itself even in the most mundane things, like the bottle flip challenge for example, even if the activity itself seems trivial and doesn't seem to give us something tangible back. The important thing is that it provides us a feeling of mastery and achievement. We feel competent. Of course, games are ideal for filling the need since it's easier to present an environment where everything is thought through carefully to provide the person with these feelings. Almost every video game conceived tries to fulfill this need in one way or another. Some might focus more on competence and others less, but this basic human need should always be taken into consideration when designing a game. So when designing your games, always ask yourself this: how is my game satisfying the player's intrinsic need for competence? Is the game making the player feel effective? Is the game setting clear and achievable goals for the player to reach? Is it giving the appropriate feedback so that the player learns something meaningful at each attempt? That's all for today. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.